There's been a lot of discussion surrounding the mysterious footage of the so-called Nightcrawler. I grew up in the Fresno area of California, and for many years, had no handle on a terrifying teenage experience that haunts me to this day. It began in 1993, when 3 friends and I decided to spend an autumn night near the woods in Millerton Lake. It was the perfect conclusion to an amazing summer, and something we had planned for so long but always found a way to put off. We walked aimlessly by the lake for hours, skipping stones, fishing, and enjoying the warmth of the quickly fading sunlight. The warmth soon disappeared behind the treetops, and we decided to take a walk a little further into the undergrowth to find a good spot to set up camp for the night. Alex and I set up the tent, while Terrence began collecting wood for a campfire. We had beer, meat, and all the necessary components for a long night's supply of s'mores. The cold autumn night air soon enveloped our campsite, and crickets began to sing as the smoky scent of the steak we were cooking drifted through the trees and up into the clear night sky. As we finished off the last of the beer, we noticed that we'd slightly underestimated the amount of wood needed to keep the fire going, so I decided to hunt around for some dry logs and branches. I paced around the campsite but couldn't find anything more substantial than a couple of twigs, so I decided to grab a flashlight and leave the safety of our enclosure out into the wall of darkness surrounding us. It became clear that this forest had experienced a run on fire building materials because for the life of me, I could not find anything big enough to justify carrying it back to camp. I didn't think I had wandered far when I heard a rush of air behind me. I turned around and saw the leaves on the forest floor twirling in the beam of my flashlight. A small dust devil, perhaps. But as I fixed my gaze ahead of me and back towards the campsite, I noticed that things were not quite right. I hadn't walked more than 200 meters and yet I couldn't see the glow of the fire whatsoever. I began to feel incredibly uneasy at the implication that I had somehow wandered further from the campsite than I imagined and was now lost in these ominous woods, alone. I managed to collect myself and began retracing my steps. The sameness of every direction was disconcerting. However, I could see the impression in the dirt of where I had walked previously, so I followed intently, knowing that I would soon see the glowing orange light of the fire and the welcoming silhouettes of my friends by a tent. The more I walked, the more I began to feel that things were not right. I was still following the trail of my footsteps, and yet somehow, after 5 minutes of walking, I was no closer to the campsite. I knew I had not walked for this long on my way out here. I stopped, feeling the need to crouch down and consider the situation before fear began to take hold. I looked around and began to notice that the trees around me felt strangely distant and faint, almost as if they were shrouded in a dark mist. This wasn't a physical mist, but rather something ominous that had somehow cloaked the forest in darkness. This wasn't just the darkness of night, but beyond that, you could feel it. I stood up, however, and logic prevailed as I continued along the path of my footsteps. In the distance, I could see something familiar. I immediately picked up the pace, and as soon as I got closer, I realized that it was the campsite, but there was no fire. The camp felt completely cold and empty. It seemed strange that the fire would have died out so quickly, but not beyond reason. I finally reached the tent, and that uneasy feeling I had managed to suppress quickly reappeared as I realized that my friends were no longer there. I called out their names and shined my flashlight into the surrounding foliage, but there was no response. At this point, all semblance of composure left my body. I realized that they could have simply wandered off to try to find me, but I somehow knew that this was not the case. Call it a sixth sense, if you will. I decided that the only thing to do was to try to restart the fire with whatever fuel I could find, but no matter what I did, no flame would appear from my Zippo lighter, as if it too wanted to hide away from the overwhelming darkness. I sat down again with my head in my hands, racking my brain for an explanation of the events thus far. I began to feel the surrounding blackness scurry closer towards me, as if it knew that somehow the absence of fire had removed some protective force field from around the camp. The next thing I can recall is just being confronted by the most terrifying sound. It can only be described as an eerie whirring noise, almost like a tornado siren, but completely unnatural and unlike anything I've ever heard. Chills ran down my spine as I sat up to determine the source of this haunting sound. It seemed to reverberate through the tree trunks in all directions, as the breeze which had been ever present throughout the evening seemed to retreat almost instantly into silence. I heard footsteps and immediately rejoiced that my friends were returning to the camp, and that we could discuss the night's events and at long last put myself at ease. As I listened to these footsteps drawing closer, I felt a sudden uneasiness as I realized that there was something very wrong with the sound. They were far too slow. It sounded as if someone was walking unnaturally leisurely, artificially, or alternatively, they were on stilts. The more I listened to these footsteps, the more convinced I became that this was the sound of someone walking on stilts, and this thought really scared me because after all, who or what would be walking on stilts in this pitch blackness in this thick forest? I shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound, dreading what I might see, but I had to know. The footsteps were closer than ever now. They must be right here, I thought. Suddenly, I see an object glint in the beam of light. The footsteps stop. At this point, I'm absolutely frozen in terror as I glimpse at a small white object through the trees. It moves slightly, and I see what looks like a head and legs. The head slowly turns towards me, and what I see causes me to scream, but no sound comes out of my mouth. The head is completely featureless. There are no eyes, no mouth, no nose, and no ears, and yet somehow I know that it's looking at me. It had no body, just a featureless head attached to long, sinewy legs, and must have been no taller than 4 feet. It slowly turned its face back to the direction in which it was traveling, as far as I could tell, and began its uncanny gait back into the darkness. I sat there, shaking and mumbling as I tried to console myself. I had no explanation of what I had seen. Just as quickly as it arrived, the ghostly darkness that surrounded everything vanished and the breeze returned to the trees. There they were, my friends, between the trees. I ran towards them and they were shocked to see my expression. "What the hell's wrong?" Terrence shouted as I reached them. It seemed that they heard something moving towards the edge of the lake and had gone to investigate, thinking it was me. It seems they too couldn't find their way back to the camp and had found themselves trapped on an endless path to nowhere. I mentioned the sound, but they hadn't heard anything and had no idea that the fire had been extinguished as it was still burning strong when they left. I told them what I had just experienced, and Alex's facial expression turned to one of horror. He told me that the Native Americans in the area had described seeing creatures for generations, and that they often carried with them a sense of dread. He headed to the camp and noticed that all of our watches had stopped running, and so we had no idea of the time frame in which these events occurred. Needless to say, at this point, we didn't sleep a wink that night, but the rest of it was uneventful. We left hastily at dawn. For years, I had wondered what these creatures were and why this one felt the need to show up at our camp. All I had was this tale of Native American legend, and the fear that stayed with me since that night. It seems now that there is video evidence of these creatures venturing outside of the forest and into built-up areas. I can't help but wonder what it is drawing them closer to humankind, and just what it is that they are planning. In the meantime, we will never know. In the fall of 2011, a man hung himself in a bottling factory of a popular over-the-counter sleep aid company just outside of Chicago. The man worked as a quality control manager and had just been laid off to save company money. In the morning, the cleaning crew found him swaying in the breeze from the air conditioning system with a note in his breast pocket that read, "Sleep tight." Over the next few months, a string of strange deaths were associated with areas where the sleep aids from the factory were shipped. Seemingly healthy people had died in their sleep from apparent strangulation. All the victims had severe bruising on their throats. Oddly, police were unable to ascertain how the murderer entered the victim's home or a possible motive for the murder. Further, vivid reports began coming in from people who had taken the pills but had not died. One lady reported taking the pill, and right before she fell asleep, she opened her eyes and a bald, middle-aged man wearing a short-sleeved white collar shirt was hovering just above her face. She closed her eyes, hoping the man would disappear, but when she opened her eyes, he was there, inches from her face. She even recalls feeling the man's breathing on her forehead. He then began strangling her. Luckily for her, her husband noticed her gasping for air in her sleep and quickly woke her up. Another man recalls falling asleep after taking the pills. He awoke to the figure of a man swaying in the corner of his room. He turned on the light next to his bed and saw the man with better accuracy. He was a bald, middle-aged man, wearing a short-sleeved white-collared shirt. The bald man then removed the noose from his neck and reportedly flowed towards the man, attempting to strangle him. Again, it was the man's spouse who woke him. He awoke gasping for air in sheer terror. The FDA did a full investigation and found no evidence of tampering. Even after a recall of the pills and a public awareness campaign warning of possible tampering, the deaths and the reports of the bald man didn't stop. It was only when the company shut down the factory that the deaths and reports decreased. It is unknown how many deaths were results of the apparent tampering, or how many of the pills from the factory are still in the cabinets across the country. Sleep tight. The video rental place down the street was having a sale, so I decided to grab something to watch later. As I was going through the bins, I found a VHS tape that didn't have any case. The only sign that anything was actually on the video was a white sticker with the word hammer scrawled across it in black ink. I had no way of telling what the movie was about, but since it was only 100 yen, I decided to buy it anyway. When I got home later that evening, I was dying to know what the video was. I put it in the VCR, and it began playing immediately. It was night, and somebody was running down a nondescript road somewhere. The point of view was that of whoever was running, and for a few minutes, the only thing on screen was the camera's bouncing as it made its way down the road. Even 100 yen is too much for this shit, I mumbled and opened my laptop. I left the video running in the background as I started messing around online. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the camera was still bobbing along, and whoever was holding it seemed to be getting pretty tired. I could hear them panting heavily, but they continued running at the same speed. I looked up when the panting became too strong to ignore. Something felt very wrong about the images on screen. Wait, I think I know this street. I closed the screen of my laptop and set it on the couch next to me. If the video took place in an area I knew, it might just be fun to watch just for that. The cameraman eventually turned a corner onto a residential street. Huh? What? That's the street I live on. The video stopped for a few seconds and seemed to freeze on the front of an apartment complex. When it began playing again, the cameraman was standing in front of somebody's door. The camera panned to the number plate next to the door. It was a name I was very familiar with. After that, he panned to the bicycle I rode home, which was next to the door. "That's my apartment," I cried out when a loud bang came from my front door. I looked back at the screen and saw that the cameraman was pounding on the door with a hammer. With every beat on the video, I heard the sound even louder coming from my door. It was perfectly synchronized. I watched the hammer and shook every time the sound reached my ears. I was too scared to move, but I could see the door from where I was sitting. My eyes found their way to the door, which was now shaking violently and had a small hole in it from whatever was out there. I could have sworn I saw the bloodshot eyes of a madman peering at me through the hole. I tore my eyes away from the door and looked back at the TV screen. While there were wood splinters obstructing part of the camera's field of view, I could clearly see myself sitting on the couch. I let out a scream and jumped backwards, bumping into the wall behind me. While I was pushing myself away from the TV and the door, I must have pressed the button on the VCR remote because the video suddenly stopped. Silence. I couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat and frantic breathing. The pounding on the door had stopped at the same time the video stopped playing. I slowly made my way to the door and opened it. Nobody was there. I went to my neighbors to tell them about it, but they'd looked at me like I was crazy. I reluctantly went back to my apartment, only to see that the door that had just been there moments before was gone. My neighbor, who was outside watching me to make sure I was alright, suggested that it was all a dream. I nodded my head and went inside. I sat down in front of the VCR and pushed the eject button. The video was still in there and had the word hammer written across the front. I could see that the tape wasn't rewound to the beginning and knew for sure that it hadn't been a dream. I quickly returned to the video rental shop with the tape and gave it back to the owner. "You want a refund?" he asked me. "No, I don't need it." I ran out of the store and went to a friend's place. I swore that I would never watch a videotape again after that. I've decided that I'm going to kill myself. I think it's important someone understand why, so I'm making this video before I blow my head off. The first time I remember it happening, I was 9. Johnny Weller and I were playing in his backyard. The sun was setting over his back fence, warm oranges and reds shining through the bone-white slats like a creamsicle against pearly white teeth. Johnny was the cowboy, and I was the dirty redskin stealing his horse. We ran around the swing set, him laughing and me whooping and threatening to scalp him. When he tripped, I ran to where he laid in the dirt, scooping up a handful of air, pointing my finger at his nose and proclaimed, "I got your gun now." Bang! Johnny's head exploded in a tremendous blossom of crimson blood, slate gray brain, and chips of skull that sparkled in the setting sun. My hand fell to my side, and I stared, open-mouthed, unable to understand what just happened. Someone was screaming. At first I thought it was Johnny's mother, until she tore open the back door and I just realized I was the one screaming. Johnny's mother crumpled against her son's headless body, adding her broken sobs to my horrified cries. Johnny's funeral was the next week, closed casket. I forgot the sparkling light shimmering across the cloud of Johnny's blood. I forgot Johnny's mother ragdolling my little body, begging me to tell her what happened to her son. I forgot the sheriff telling my mother Johnny was hit by a falling bullet, one of 26 cases each year. I forgot my father's quiet talks with my mother about how they never found the round that spattered Johnny's smile across the grass. I adjusted. I coped. I forgot. I didn't forget the next time it happened. I never played Cowboys and Indians again. In fact, I can't remember a single instance of any shooting game played by little boys anywhere in my childhood. I do remember the little girl in the park, popping her little Nerf balls as she bounced around. She ran up to me, brandishing the weapon and shouting, "Hands up!" I smiled and complied, dropping my sandwich in mock terror. I lifted my hands to the sky and petitioned for mercy. A true homicidal maniac in the making, she executed me with a flurry of staccato pops. I dutifully played dead, sprawling across my bench. She giggled and proclaimed, "Your turn, shoot me." A sudden sensation of intense discomfort slithered up my spine. I thought of flowers, glittering crimson roses, wet with morning dew. She eyed me impatiently, apparently convinced she might have to nerf me once more to provoke a response. I lifted my finger weakly, pointed at her, and whispered, "Bang." This time I wasn't the one screaming. Her mother cradled her baby's dismembered limbs, frantically clutching an arm, then a leg. I had pointed my finger at the little girl's belly button. The moment the word left my lips, she ruptured like a water balloon filled with punch and soaking bits of crimson-colored fluid. Johnny Weller's decapitated body filled my vision. The slow red of sunset sliding down the front of his striped shirt. I ran. I can't do this anymore. I got pissed at Laura yesterday and put my finger in her face to tell her off. I didn't even say it. I couldn't bring myself to sop my girlfriend's brains off the kitchen floor. I can't do this anymore. All I have to do is put my finger against my temple and say it. At least I'll go out with a bang. Just ignore it. You're probably a little bit on edge. You've been reading and listening to a lot of creepypastas today. Your mind is racing, and you think you can't fall asleep. Don't fret. I'll help you put your mind at ease. All you have to do is just push all of those stories to the back of your mind. Have faith in the fact that those are just stories and nothing more. If you see something outside your window, just ignore it. It's just a trick of the eye is all. If you're woken up by footsteps late at night, just ignore it. Your mother is probably just making her way to the bathroom. If you hear a door slowly opening with an unnerving squeak, just ignore it. Your house is old, and it's probably just settling. If you wake up to an odd smell, just ignore it. There are many things in your room that have an odd odor to them. Now, if you wake up to a rather uneasy feeling, something warm on the back of your neck, your heart beating faster than it has ever before, your body tense so tightly that you think that you'll collapse in on yourself if you don't relax. You could ignore it, but I don't think you'll be able to when you feel the cold metal of my knife pressed up against your back. In the apartment complex where I live now, there's a story about a girl who lived in one of the buildings. She lived on the 7th floor and used to get home late because she was working on her thesis and her school was a bit far from her place. The story goes, every time she would take the elevator, it would stall on the 4th floor. The sliding doors wouldn't open or anything, but there would be this feeling of pressure on the elevator, as if someone would step in and join her. Do you know that feeling of having someone stand next to you and stare at you, even though you couldn't see them? Apparently, this would happen to her each time. In fact, it got so bad that one particular night, she asked her mother if she could wait for her in the lobby and accompany her upstairs. Her mom of course agreed. The girl arrived home later than usual that night, say around 3 a.m. Thankfully, her mother was at the lobby, waiting for her like she promised. They entered the elevator together, and when the elevator paused on the 4th floor, the girl looked at her mother and said, "See what I mean? It always happens." The older woman, in an effort to comfort her daughter, wrapped an arm around her shoulder and leaned in, right before whispering, "Do I really look like your mother?" The next day, they found the slumped form of the girl in the elevator, alone. She was dead. There were no marks on her body, and on her face was a look of pure horror. Somewhere on this planet, there is a tree connected to you. This link is so deep that your life force is fundamentally connected to your respective tree. Specifically, if you were to perish, your tree would as well. However, the reverse is also true. Should your soul tree meet its end, you would fall into the eternal sleep as well. You were both conceived on the same day. The day that you were born is the day your soul tree was planted. Think about this. For every acre of forest felled, that many more human lives have met their end. Deforestation seems quite heinous now, doesn't it? Even worse, those responsible for setting forest fires are guilty of nothing short of massacre. Sure, scientists try to justify a rash of death through disease, war, or famine. However, the true cause of death is the end of a soul tree. This has been true since the beginning, and will continue until both humans and trees are bereft of the planet one day. You may be thinking to yourself, what of antiquated trees that are centuries old? The answer to this conundrum is that those trees represent the few individuals who have undergone the ceremony of the immortal. These individuals each possessed a fear of death so great that they would go to any lengths to stop it, thus the ceremony. You too can undergo this ceremony, but there is a reason few choose this path. Those that don't perish in the ritual stop aging altogether and have no need of sustenance or sleep. The drawback is that they must never again encounter any human soul, where they shall decompose into bones on the spot. These few individuals, known as lost souls, often fall into the realm of myth and legend, but they are all too real. Should you possess the will and ability to undergo the ritual, the ceremony of the immortal is as follows. You must first locate the forest where your soul tree is located. This can be done at any time, although nighttime is recommended, for you can feel the connection of your soul tree the strongest at that point. Once you have located your tree, you must return to it on your birthday at exactly 1:11 a.m. Don't forget to bring a knife or other sharp object. When you arrive at the appointed time, you must use your knife to draw blood from your dominant hand. Use your right hand if you're ambidextrous. Once the blood is flowing, quickly grab the trunk of your soul tree and don't let go. Speak the words, "I give my life force beyond my spirit." If done quickly enough, the tree will seem to suck all the blood out of your hand, but you will survive. If you messed up somehow, or picked the wrong tree, poison will flow through your veins, and you will die a slow, agonizing death. Once your cut has stopped bleeding, quickly release your hand and look up towards the sky. If you see any type of moon above you, then you are safe. If the skies are cloudy, or there is a new moon, then you will be relentlessly hunted for the rest of your short life by a beast too terrible for words. It will keep you alive just enough to torture you in every way imaginable. As you finally die by its hands, you will know that your life was not meant to be eternal. Should you succeed, you would never need to eat or sleep again. You will not age a day since the ritual. However, you must keep in mind that you will be alone for the rest of your miserable life, and many have gone mad from the prospect. Should you retain your sanity, you shall be faced with the question that has likely plagued lost souls for centuries. Is this better than death? I have always hated the idea of sleeping during the day. But this time, I was so tired that I decided to lie down on my bed and close my eyes for a minute. It was 4:32 on my watch when I went to bed, and I knew I finished all my chores, so I took a deep breath and slept. I had a dream and I remember some details. It was raining and I was in the backyard. My mother built an extra room for the house some years ago. The room was next to my parents' room, which was next to me, and there were two ways to enter that room. One way was going up the stairs in the backyard that would lead into the iron gate or through the crystal door in my parents' bedroom. In my dream, I remember going up those stairs, but instead of going into the extra room, I stood there near the end of the stairs, staring inside of my own room. I could perfectly see the figure of someone sleeping out on my bed, but was it me? That's all I remember. The sound of raindrops hitting the ceiling woke me up. It took me a minute to realize that I was back to reality, and I got up to take a look out the window. Just like in my dream, it was raining. Strangest thing in my town, but I thought it was time for it to happen already, so I didn't pay much attention to it. I checked my watch and discovered that the needles were not moving, and that they had stopped since 4:34 p.m. In my need to know the hour, I tried turning on my computer and my TV, but nothing happened. It looked like there was no electricity in my house. I walked to the hallway and looked for my parents in their bedroom, but they were not there. I kept on searching in the kitchen, the living room, and the dining room, but the house seemed empty. They must have gone to the grocery store or something, I thought. When I headed to the front door to go out and check if the car was there, I saw that it had an enormous lock keeping the door shut. It was one of those bold, heavy locks made of the hardest steel, but what the hell was it doing there? My parents wouldn't allow such a thing. I looked around the first floor, but there were no keys. I don't mean I was looking for the lock's keys. I was looking for any of the keys I use in my house, but there was nothing. I tried to use the telephone, but the line was dead. That's when I realized that I still had my cell phone in my pocket. Dead battery. Now I was freaking out. I checked the back entrance and discovered that it too was locked. So were all the windows. What was going on? I went into my room and checked my watch again, but it was still frozen. I walked through the dark halls of my house and checked the darkest corners, but I just couldn't think of an explanation or a way out. Then, I remembered the crystal door in my parents' room. It was locked, but it was no big deal since it was made of such a weak material. So I grabbed a desk lamp and I made a hole big enough for me to go through. It's a problem when you don't think things twice, and now, with the crystal door broken, I still need to open the iron gate before going to the backyard and to the streets to know what was going on. I knew there would be no use in trying to open the gate, so I went into the extra room. It was empty as always. It was a large, empty room with white walls and floor, and the only light was coming from a window close to the entrance. Despite the illumination coming from it, the opposite side of the room was filled with a deep dark. The more I looked into that darkness, the more I felt something was there, staring directly at my eyes. A chill went down my spine and I decided to go back to my parents' room. There was no way I was leaving the crystal door like that, so I pushed my dad's desk and blocked the entrance between me and the horrible room. It is midnight, I guess, and the sun has gone down. My parents, like the electricity, are not here yet. Actually, I don't know if I'll see them again. Since it got darker, strange noises have been coming from that room, and even though I locked my door, I know there is no use. I saw a big, dark figure opening the iron fence and positioning itself on the stairs of the backyard. It has stared at me for over an hour, and I have been here, scared and not moving a muscle. It went back to the room, and now I can hear him pushing my dad's desk with no effort. It's coming for me. It's outside the door of my room. I'm scared. Help. I've been blind since birth. As I grew up, everything was described to me in such vivid detail that I didn't even realize why it was important to see, especially having no reference point to compare it to. We lived in a single-floor ranch house. That's what Father told me. In my mind, of course, I could see, although, unlike how many sighted people could. I had spatial awareness. I knew where my bedroom was, where the bathroom, living room, and kitchen were. Each wall had its own texture. I don't know if that was done on purpose, or if I could feel things others never noticed. I rarely fell over. Only if Father or one of the visitors put something somewhere they shouldn't have. It was usually the visitors, and Father would shout. They visited infrequently, and only briefly when they did. Father said I shouldn't speak to them, that it unsettled him. He'd worry when I saw something he didn't, saw it with my ears or by touch. Ellie was the first. She seemed very sweet. She asked me my name and why my face was so messed up. She was in the living room. I could hear where she sat from her breath. Harsh nasal sounds, as if her nose was blocked. When Father had a cold, he'd always breathe through his mouth, big labored breaths, as if he wasn't used to it. When people mentioned my face, I always touched it, trying to work out why it was so strange to them. When I asked if I could touch theirs, there was always a pause. I guess sighted people never did that. Why would they need to? When I asked Ellie if I could touch her face, she reluctantly agreed. But moments later, Father entered the room and asked me who I was speaking to. I told him nobody. He would always punish me when I spoke about them. I think it scared him. He'd take my arm and march me off. I'd be knocked off balance and disoriented, to the point where when he finally set me down, my hands would frantically be searching my surroundings until I knew where I was. It was usually my bedroom, though every now and then he'd leave me outside, in the middle of nowhere. That was the worst part. I would be lost and scared. He told me about the road that ran in front of the house and explained that the sounds I heard were cars, that they'd kill me if they touched me. Those sounds were my only means of recognizing my surroundings. I waited until I heard one and then knew which way to run back to the house. I heard Ellie that evening. She whispered to me, saying she was scared. I whispered back, but she didn't hear. I asked Father about Ellie. He didn't want to talk about her. I asked him why, and he didn't reply. When I told him that she asked about my face, he asked me how I responded. I told him I wanted to touch hers. He laughed, though I knew he wasn't happy. I could hear the difference. When you laugh for pleasure, your mouth is wide open. When you pretend, your mouth is almost closed. To me, the difference is obvious. It wasn't until I was a little older that he explained. He said we lived in a special place, connected to the other world, that sometimes dead people slipped through, people who died in pain and wanted to reach the living. He explained that because I couldn't see, I was able to tune into that they knew I was listening when others weren't. He said I had to ignore it. Otherwise, he told me they'd latch on and never leave me. All the dead wants is to be alive again, he said. It was dangerous and they would trick me. He said he knew how to deal with them, but he couldn't help if they became attached to me. Alex appeared to me a few years later. She told me she was lost and didn't know where she was. I told her I wasn't allowed to speak to her, and still, she pleaded for help. I kept quiet, knowing what would happen if I said anything. "Did you speak to them?" Father asked. Though I was upset, I told him no. I wished I could help her. I knew what it was like to be lost and it scared me. Alex didn't whisper to me at all. I had ignored her, and she'd ignored me. Father saved me, and I was thankful. After Alex, I knew what I needed to do, so I did it. The spirit stopped bothering me after that for a very long time. That was until Sarah appeared. Sarah didn't give me a chance to be quiet. I was on my own, sitting in the living room and listening to the television. "Help," she said. "I need to find a way out." I stayed silent. "You can hear me, can't you?" she asked, surprised. "I'm not allowed to speak to you," I told her. "Please," she begged. "I'm scared. I'm lost. I want to see my daddy." I gripped the arms of the chair and told her I wasn't allowed. "He's dead," she said. I didn't answer. "Your father is dead," she said again. I wasn't going to fall for it. I heard banging from around the room as things began to fly, and the shelves began to shake. "Stop it," I shouted, and it did. "Please, help me leave," she said. I wasn't going to talk to her. I did the only thing I thought would help. I unlocked the front door, hoping she'd run out and get lost, just like I would do. When I heard from her no more, I locked the door and sat back down. I listened intently for any signs she was still there. Except for the sounds of the TV, it was silent. I hated when my heart raced. It became all too aware of the tick-tock feeling of the rise and fall within my chest, like it was about to explode. When I heard my father's voice, I screamed. "Son," he said, "I need your help. I think I'm dying." I did what he told me to do. I didn't speak. If he did die, he'd never leave me. Instead, I raced out into the open air and shouted for help. I shouted until my voice was hoarse. I heard the sounds of cars racing along the road in front of my house. I shouted until I heard someone respond. It was a woman. What's wrong? They asked. I told them I think my father was dying. They asked me what happened to my face. I pleaded with them to help me, and they promised they would. I sat down on the grass and waited. Sometime later, the woman returned to me and asked if she could hold my hand. I'm so sorry, she told me. I heard the sound of sirens and of people rushing. I asked what was going on. The woman said she was there for me. As the noise died down, a man asked me a question. I'm a paramedic, he said. What happened to your face? I told him I was fine. He asked if I was sure, and I told him I was. He asked if I minded him touching my face. I said it was okay. A moment later, I felt a pressure release from around my forehead, and the air felt cold against my skin. It sounded as if he were peeling an orange. I imagined that in my head and worried he'd exposed my insides. I screamed and asked what he was doing. He told me everything was going to be okay, and the woman squeezed my hand, telling me to be brave. I didn't know what I was experiencing. I felt a tight pain within my head, like when you smash your shin against something, followed by something I've come to understand as bright. It hurt so much, I began to cry. What happened to your eyes? The paramedic asked. I said I was blind. He asked to check them. The pain returned when he examined them. Do you know him? The man asked the woman who had helped me. She told him that I had been screaming for help and that she'd come to my aid, but that she had never met me before. How long have you had your eye injury? He asked me. I told him I'd been blind from birth. He asked me if I could see his fingers. I told him no. He asked if I could open my eyes. I said I didn't know what he meant. He asked if he could open them for me. I didn't respond. Then, I felt his fingers on my face, fingers covered in something rubbery. Suddenly, it became bright again. I screamed. He tried to calm me. The woman squeezed my hand again. I didn't know what was happening. Things I couldn't describe came to me. It was like it always was, but multiplied 100-fold and so much more real. I carried on screaming as a fuzzy form came into view. Just breathe, okay? The paramedic said. Everything will be fine. When was the last time you saw? As my heart began to calm and my breathing slowed, I became distracted by what I was experiencing. It overwhelmed me. I wanted to cry, and I did. How long has it been? He asked me. I've never seen anything before, I told him. I was told to keep an eye mask on for most of the day, only taking it off at night at first, to allow my eyes time to adjust. At the same time, I was placed in the custody of my aunt and uncle, and didn't even know it at first. They were shocked at what happened to me, and that I had never attended school. The past few years have been a roller coaster ride. The doctor said I may never have perfect vision, though what little I have is a godsend, and I'll take what I can get. I've only recently began learning to read and write, so I apologize if my English isn't the greatest. It's the best that I can do. I've been asking my aunt what happened to my father, but all she says is that he died of a heart attack. I asked what sort of man he was. She says he was her brother and she'll love him no matter what. My uncle doesn't want to talk about him at all. I've been using the computer a lot recently and really enjoying the internet. I can't believe such a thing exists. After being so lonely for so long, I can talk to whoever I want, when I want, though I'm wary of that. After all, how do I know who I'm speaking to is alive? No one seems to share my father's concerns about that. Today, I was on a forum discussing the spirit world. I was so happy that I could find people I could relate to, and someone curious about my username sent me a link to an article on a true crime website. It was about my father, and mentioned me by name. They asked me who I was, and if I was the same person. According to that article, my mother had gone missing soon after my birth. It said I'd been bound so that I couldn't see, that my father always wanted a daughter. They found 14 bodies in that basement. They said one got away, a girl by the name of Sarah Frank. She was the one to call the police. They found Father's car parked around the back of the house. They supposed he carried his victims into the basement via the storm entrance and left them there. Sarah had managed to get away after she agreed to be his daughter following 4 days of sustained torture. She stabbed him with the knife he placed on the counter to butter some toast. I didn't want to believe it, and I'm not sure I would have if it weren't for the names of the victims, 2 of which stuck out: Ellie Farmer and Alex Riddle. I'd spoken to them both in the living room. To this day, I wonder if my father had been honest with me about a single thing in his life. Throughout it all, one question remains above all others. Did I speak to Ellie and Alex before or after he killed them? It was the 2nd of January, 2:04 a.m. I woke up to a knocking on the door. One knock every 3 seconds. I slipped on my slippers and walked down the stairs. As I walked down, the knocking on the door got faster, almost like a heartbeat. When I got to the door, the knocking stopped. I looked outside, and nobody was there. I went back up to my room and went back to bed, thinking it was just some kid playing a prank. At 4:21 a.m., I woke up to my front door slamming shut. I jumped, terrified. I looked over at my frosted window to find "Smile" written all over it in frost. I grabbed my phone next to me, ready to call 911, only to find a message written on it saying, "I told you to smile." I cried and ran for my life running outside. As soon as I got outside, I knocked on my neighbor's house across the road. They answered and held me while I sobbed. They phoned the police. At exactly 5:42, the police came to my neighbor's house after an extensive search of my house. They told me there had been no evidence at all of anyone in my house other than me. The messages on my window were gone, same with my phone. They told me to get some sleep and advised me to go see the doctor about stress and anxiety problems. Fuck that. I knew what happened to me was real. The following evening, after spending the day at my neighbor's, I went home. I went up to my bedroom and set up a camera. It was aimed at my bedroom door and my bed. I set it to record and went to sleep. Thankfully, I slept through the night. However, as I watched the footage, I couldn't believe what I saw. At 3 a.m, something crawled out from under my bed. It was a completely naked, anorexic man. He stood up and looked at me on the bed. He did so for another hour, not moving at all. Then, he moved. He walked over to the camera until his face took up the whole shot. He was extremely pale and had bulging veins all over his head. His eyes were completely black, with a huge smile on his face. He stared at the camera for another 2 hours, not blinking, just slightly twisting his head every now and again. After 2 hours of him staring went past, he walked back over to my bed and crawled back under. I skipped the video forward until it showed me getting up and walking over to the camera. The video finished. I was frozen with fear. The video showed him going back under, but not leaving. Whatever it was still there. Entry number 1. The blink. The next wipe is in 20 minutes and 4 seconds. Whatever you do, please, just listen. All that's important is that I keep trying, relaying as much information as possible. If this happens to you at any point in the future, it is absolutely essential that you know what I'm about to say, because then You may be able to stop it if it leaves here. 19 minutes and 50 seconds left. Let's make that time count. Here's my story. Red Pier, Alaska. It's where I live at the moment, and where at least 60 others do as well, along with about 140 tourists. Most of them are gone now, but that's beside the point. It's totally isolated from any other town on the map. There's a reason you've never heard of it. If you look up a map on Google Earth, you'll find an empty square of ocean where our island is located. If you somehow brave the wilderness to make it here, you'll find that there are no bridges, no ports, and no landing strips anywhere near our location. In fact, if you try to find us, chances are you won't even be able to see us amidst the fog. It's because nothing was meant to leave here. It wasn't always like this. About 65 hours ago, we were just your average winter getaway town. Hell, maybe we even had bridges and landing strips then. Skiing was our main attraction, pretty much because we had nothing else to offer. Besides, snow was our weather forecast 24/7, and I don't think we'd ever had a sunny day since the town was founded. At least, that's what I picked up from a brochure. Christ, what I'd give to see a sun now. I don't even know what one looks like anymore. I know what it is. It's like it just comes as natural knowledge, the concept of it, but I can't pair it with any relatable sense. It's as if you're trying to draw a scene from a book. You can never know what it really looks like in the author's head, except here, it always feels like something's missing. I'm going to be honest, I don't know why I'm here in Red Pier. I don't know who I am. I don't know what I did for a living. I don't know if anyone else knows I'm stranded. All I know at the moment, in fact, the only thing I know for sure, is that 2 days ago, at 2:09 p.m., everything went black. This is what I've been able to piece together from CCTV footage. Everything was normal leading up to the event, with important-looking men and women leisurely walking around town, stopping in shops for some souvenir trinkets. Any semblance of light that managed to permeate the thick cloud layer vanished in a matter of seconds. It went from day to night in the blink of an eye. The power lines running from the only power plant on the island went out instantaneously. Every light source, save for the fire in the hearts of the ski lodges, had been extinguished. Naturally, the worst-case scenario was assumed. Everyone else was trying to contact family and ask if anyone else was experiencing the blackout. The town council tried to ring up the weather bureau to find out what could be causing it, but all the phone signals were dead. Worse still, the emergency spotlights wouldn't come on. We were now totally isolated, even more than before. Frantically, people declared that there can only be an absolutely massive storm incoming, seeing no other explanation, and the town went into lockdown. The tourists all lodged in the cabins, boarding up the windows and sealing the doors in preparation for the worst. But nothing happened for 2 hours. The sky stayed black, the power stayed off, and the doors stayed shut. Everyone was huddled inside, crouching in absolute silence at the anticipation of whatever event was to befall the quiet town. Eventually, the council issued an announcement over the loudspeaker, saying that they were still trying to figure out what was happening, and that everyone should remain indoors until further notice. And that, as far as I can gather, is when the first wipe came. At 4:09 p.m. exactly, in the span of less than a second, the following occurred. The power came back on across town. All at once, the TV sets turned back on, the lights flickered back into life, and the spotlights began sweeping across the snow-covered streets. The sky lit up in a brilliant flash, similar to lightning, but stretching across the entire island, coming from no apparent source. What does real lightning even look like? I only know what it is from the snowboard designs in the tourist center. I imagine it looks terrifying. And every single person on the island, including me, blinked simultaneously in a single fluid motion. Then everything went black again. We woke up, looked around, and realized nothing. We couldn't realize anything because we had all lost ability to process information. We had lost all ability to do anything. I remember not remembering. My mind was just empty. No, don't imagine. That's exactly it. Just try not imagining, not thinking, not being able to connect any of your senses to your surroundings. That's how it felt, or would have, if we had the ability to perceive what we were feeling. There was panic at first, if you could call it that. People flailing all over the floor, men and women feeling around their heads as if they're trying to clutch at their unconscious minds. Soon after people had gotten a grip on what was where, it didn't take long for fighting to break out. It was total chaos. That's when the abduction started. We don't know exactly what happened. Most of us couldn't register it. Among the crowd of frenzied people, one or two would have shining, writhing tendrils composed of light slowly creep out of his or her orifices, like vines growing through the cracks of a wall. Again, this is a concept I only know of from the framed pictures in the lobby. In the CCTV footage, you could hear the confused moans and screams of the people slowly being drowned out by a much louder, penetrating shriek. A terrifying whine of white noise created from the combined agony of all the people who had no ability to feel, or even understand anything. All the cameras went static for a split second, and when the footage returned, the people were gone, vanished without a trace. The fortunate souls who had avoided being taken over by the tendrils were completely unaware of the sudden disappearance of their colleagues, and many were completely unaware that they were even alive and breathing. I don't know who those people were. None of us will ever know. It's like they never existed. But the mind is a fantastic contraption. Even when all of its data is erased without warning, it still retains the most basic human ability to learn. As the hours passed, those of us who survived began to realize that we could place our senses. As we stumbled our way down the empty corridors, we began to grasp at what we were seeing, the fact that we were seeing. We developed the ability to process, to comprehend, to put into action thoughts which came into our heads. Through the books and brochures in the tourist center, and by watching the videos stockpile in the boardroom, we eventually pieced together how to read, how to speak, and how to communicate. Self-preservation kicked in, and soon we began to fight, not out of confusion, but for survival. Resource gathering began, factions were made, and we eventually began to associate priorities with jobs and responsibilities. We were rebuilding society in complete isolation. Whoever we previously were became unimportant. Our identities didn't matter. I tried searching pockets to find some sort of name, but I couldn't find any. For now, we just refer to ourselves by letter. I'm H. Even though we had regained our sense of self, we still couldn't understand what had happened. I've tried working it out. It's possible the light takes the people with the slowest brain development first, still unable to process what is happening. An empty shell to hijack for whatever purpose it sees fit. I don't know who or what is doing this either, but they're up there, in the clouds, and they're waiting for our next move. We deduce that this happened 2 times already, and that they occur 22 hours apart to the minute, which means we've restarted civilization 3 times since. If it were any other situation, I'd be proud. All I have to say is, thank God the clocks here are analog. Keeping track of time is probably the most important skill we can have. In fact, I'm so focused on it that I barely notice anything else. But what I have noticed, going through the CCTV, is that every time the cameras turn to static, something disappears along with the people. First it was the IDs, I think. There were a few wallets lying on the ground that weren't there when the footage returned. Next, it was the pictures on the wall. Before the static, the lobby was lined with several examples of nature photography. But the next second, there were just blank frames. Most recently, it was the books. A few of them I had survived, but it became clear that whatever was causing it doesn't want us to learn and adapt from our environment. It wants to abduct us quietly, before we have any free will to say otherwise. Well, I for one am not giving in, and that's why I'm telling you this now. It doesn't matter if you don't believe me. This isn't for you. I need to have something physical to remember what happened after the next wipe comes. The next wipe. 1 minute and 7 seconds. Fuck. Listen, please, whatever you do, don't come looking for us. They will find you. You can't escape from here. Trust me, we've tried. The waters are too cold to swim in for even a minute before hypothermia sets in. At least 3 men have died trying. What worries me most is what could be next to vanish along with the people. I'm using a laptop I found for this right now, and it doesn't have much battery left. If they take this, or disable the internet, or even the CCTV, then I don't think I'm gonna last another wipe. Hell, I don't even know if sending this will work. If the council couldn't reach anyone, then it's unlikely this will either. 13 seconds left. Hitting submit now. Wish me luck. H. Entry number 2. The power. The next wipe is in 11 hours, 17 minutes, and 28 seconds. It's me again, whoever I am. I went by the name H before, so I guess that's my identity now. I'm still regaining control of my brain at the moment, so forgive me if my thoughts seem a little cluttered. From the looks of my previous post, it seems I'm lucky to be alive. How I managed to evade the abduction is beyond me. I assumed then that there were a lot more people left than there are now. All that's left is a group of 8 of us, 5 women, 3 men, including me, all corresponding to letters, which we had already written on our arms when we regained consciousness. I guess we decided to write our identities before the most recent wipe. That was smart. Not because we all know who we are. It's so we know who's missing. It's just A, C, D, E, F, H, me, K, and P left. We still haven't figured out what's going on here. It hasn't been that long since the wipe, and we can't fully remember things. All our nerves feel numb, and my muscles often break into wild spasms. I remember coming to in front of this laptop, totally confused and disoriented, making whatever sound I could to let the world know I was there. From what little details I can recall, I just felt alone. Without knowing it, or knowing anything, the concept of isolation got to me. Mere existence was not enough. I needed to know I existed. It's a comfort we all take for granted, I guess. Well, I think it's time I updated you on my scenario here in Red Pier. In my post, I said there was CCTV somewhere in this building. I've looked everywhere, but I can't find any terminal, or even any cameras to interact with. The only explanation I have is that whatever is doing this has taken them, like before with the books. This means that I'm going to have to pay a lot more attention to my surroundings, because the cameras were the only thing that truly showed us what happened. We still have the books I stowed away, the tourism films, some rations, and, most importantly, the clocks. Nothing else is of much use. Eventually, this post will be the only evidence we have left, until they take away the laptop, which I've made sure to keep on my person at all times. I don't think they're able to knock out the internet entirely, considering that my first post went through, thank God. So let's make these hours count, again. Here's a list of my surroundings for next time, assuming there will be one. There are 3 books, 2 novels, 1 encyclopedia, inside the armchair cushion on the ground floor. The tourist videos are always in A's backpack. There is at least 1 clock observable from any one place in the building. If I can't see any, it's safe to assume that they've been taken. The laptop is inside my shirt, tied up at the bottom so it doesn't fall. That way, it'll be the hardest to get, if I don't get abducted first. If I do, then it comes with me, assuming I'm still alive. The visitor records are still inside the reception desk at the front, but it's been barricaded off. I'm sitting here in the lobby with the others. I don't know if any of the other factions have survived, but since we were the largest, it's almost unlikely. We've been making trips outside periodically to gather supplies from the other buildings. A, D, and K are out there now. Meanwhile, the rest of us are throwing what furniture is left into the fire so we can stay warm. The heat shut off with the lights, and E is already suffering from hypothermia. I don't think she can hold on much longer. It's only going to get harder. I find myself reading over the last post again, trying to picture everything I mentioned that I can't remember anymore. I talked about a snowboard, but none of us have found any boards or skis across town. Maybe they took those too. The worst thing is reading about how the others were taken. Without the footage, I keep trying to picture those tendrils of light, but I can't. I said it myself. You can't know what the original scene looked like if it's only written in words. It's terrifying to know how you're going to die, and yet not know what it is that's going to kill you, or even what it looks like. That said, I don't even know if the people who were abducted are dead, but I really can't imagine any situation they could be in that would be better than death. In fact, I can't imagine much of anything anymore. Every time there's a wipe, I think we lose a little bit of ourselves inside of our subconscious. My memory is getting more and more fuzzy as time goes by. I'm having trouble remembering where I've hidden my rations around this time. Whatever is doing this has powers we can't possibly comprehend. The ability to manipulate their inner workings of the brain. A few of us have been talking this out, trying to theorize what happened. Here's what we know so far. They've left some of us alive. This can mean one of two things. A, their power is limited, which could explain why the abductions only happen every 22 hours. B, they're fully aware we're alive down here and doing this on purpose. Maybe it's some sort of sick, twisted experiment to find out God knows what. I hate to think any more down this route. They never take more than one or two collective pieces of evidence every wipe. It's a seemingly random pattern, which means we have to have backup ways of relearning. We can never know how many people were taken each wipe, since we can't remember their existence in the first place. The power plant I mentioned in the first post definitely has something to do with all this. While on one of his supply runs, C noticed that, although the town's power is shut off, the power plant is still running. He said he could faintly hear the whining of the turbine rotors as they churned through the water. It's entirely possible that if scenario A is correct, the limitations are due to the power it takes to transmit the signal. We will find a way to fight this. It's all we've been able to come up with while we can still think. We have multiple copies of this list with a few of our people in case one gets taken. Abduction is an inevitability at this point, and we know we're fighting in vain against something that will ultimately claim us. But if we didn't fight, we'd be giving out in cowardice, and that's not how humanity works. I've come this far, rebuilt civilization isolated on this island 5 times now. If there's anything I've learned, it's that our species' greatest strength is its will to keep going. Our will in general. The will to continue on, even when the situation is in total disarray. The will to persist in the face of annihilation. The will to adapt to any conditions if it means just living for one more day. To see the light of an intangible sun one last time before falling into darkness. I look back on myself sometimes and wonder if any of this is worth it. If we should just give in now and dive headfirst into the current. It's a feeling I've gotten used to over the time I've been aware. All of us here have it at some point, and we're here to tell ourselves, yes, it is worth it, that our consciousness is a right worth fighting for. It's not just a basic right, it's a basic human right. The more I look at this, the more I question whether the cause of this is actually human. I don't know how any person could live with seeing their own kind pushed to the brink of sanity in this way. I want to think it's something inhuman, and yet that thought scares me even more. Well, D and K just came back. They said they checked out the area near the power plant. They said that they saw lights coming from inside. Lights. The thought of bathing in the warm glow of an incandescent bulb is enough to make me cry. They say we should plan an excursion to investigate the source in the next few hours. I'll fill you in when the time comes. I should be able to provide updates. Now that I have time, we're going to make it through this. We will. We have to. Update number 1. I don't know how this happened, but A has vanished. None of us remember who she was, what she looked like. I can only assume she was female because I mentioned above that there were 5 women and now there's only 4. D and K say they went out as a pair alone, with nobody else. I'm starting to get really fucking paranoid now. Either D and K are hiding something, Or somehow, the wipe is becoming localized, able to pick us off while we're still conscious. Fuck. I don't know which is worse. This is especially bad considering that A apparently had the videos on her, which means we've lost another piece of evidence. Those were the only things teaching us how to speak. I'm worried that, if we survive the next wipe, we'll lose all ability to communicate vocally. Anyway, I've told everyone to keep a close eye on D and K. The last thing we want is mistrust within our own group. In the meantime, C, F, and I discussed what to do. We were supposed to travel to the power plant as a threesome. That would mean leaving the others alone with D and K, especially E, who can no longer move her legs as a result of frostbite. Honestly, I don't know what to do. We're all paranoid beyond comprehension. I'll update more soon once we figure out what our next plan of action is. Update number 2. I don't know what the fuck has happened since last time. All I know is that I woke up in a pool of my own blood about 4 hours ago. My jaw has a huge gash in its underside. There's a blood-soaked ice pick on the chair where I put my books. So my best guess is that someone stuck that right into my head and dragged it through. I couldn't feel pain when I regained consciousness after the last wipe like always, but this time, it was different. I could see that something was wrong. The liquid on the floor didn't belong there, and I was aware that my life force was slowly draining, oozing out of my body in steady streams. I just stared as my own blood poured from my mouth and wound, collecting on the floor and being bathed in what remained of the firelight. I don't think I've ever felt such fear before. As for everyone else, when I came to, I found F dead on the floor with her skull crushed in. The way she was lying, it looked like she was trying to crawl towards the fire, to experience the sensation of warmth for one last time as her senses slowly faded away. I don't blame them. It's what I would have done too. E is the only one without any visible wounds on her corpse. It seems she died of hypothermia long before this wipe. But D and K are gone. There's no signs they were ever here, or that they even existed. I don't know if it was them that did this. I fucking hope it wasn't. But it's unlikely that the cause of this would try hurting us physically, instead of just wiping us off the face of the island. If it was them, then we have a big fucking problem. I so badly want to say that they fled into the snow after committing all this, but both C and I know that they would have left footprints. There aren't any outside either exit, which means they're still inside the building, or they've been taken too. Why the fuck would they do this? Did they kill A as well? I don't think we have time to ponder about that. C is motioning us to head out as soon as we can. Oh, by the way, they took all the clocks, and the books I had in the chair, and the documents, as if things couldn't get worse. I've read and reread my above posts to try to get a better understanding of what our situation is, but at this point, my mind is so fuzzy that I can barely retain any information anymore without giving myself a headache. C is complaining about these problems too. Holy fuck. I think I just heard something from upstairs. I'll update as soon as I can. I believe that we're gonna get through this. All we need to do is pack up our rations and deal with the potential murderers loose in the building. I almost don't want to stop typing. Even though I can't see any of you, I feel so much more comfortable telling all of this, knowing that someone else knows. I can't describe this feeling. I don't think anyone really experiences true longing until their lives are pushed to the brink. I'm sorry if I can't reply to your comments as quickly as I want to. Trust me, I want to more than anything right now, but no. There was definitely a noise. Fuck it. I'm going up there with this ice pick. C's nodding in agreement. Wish me luck. Again. Update number 3. C and I just woke up outside one of the second floor rooms. We can't remember anything that happened in the past hour. How we got up here. Why we came up here. There's a door in front of us that's been split off its hinges, and inside is this empty room with no windows. We took a quick look inside, but it's empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no lights, no decorations. It's just a blank room in the middle of a tourist center. I think this is where the noise I was talking about came from, but it looks like this room's been abandoned for years. The only evidence we have that something happened is the residue that was left on the inside of the door frame. Think of when you burn something in a fire, and then picture that black, charred outline that forms when you take it away. Imagine that, but if it was made of light. Instead of black soot, the inside is covered in this energy. I don't know what to call it. It's just a series of points of light stretching from where the door was clearly ripped open. It's not even light. It's not glowing. It's just a single contained instance of pure illumination. Something was definitely here, inside the building. This can't be D or K, not unless they're somehow connected to all of this. This is something directly connected to whatever's controlling our consciousness. I don't know how long it's been here, how long it's been listening, feeding the information on what our most valuable assets are and retaining our ability to think. If it can do this, God knows what else it can do. It could still be in this building for all we know. One thing's for certain. We need to leave. Now. We're only grabbing a few rations. In about 3 minutes, we'll be outside in the snow, making our way toward the power plant. It's been growing progressively louder as time goes by. I can faintly hear the screeching of metal spinning in the harsh waters of red beer. We need to find answers. I don't care if I die at this point. I just need to die knowing what's going on here. I need to die knowing something. Anything at all. Laptop battery 13%. 2 of us left. The next wipe is in 4 hours and 13 minutes. I'll see you then. H. Entry number 3. The light. The last wipe should have been 7 hours ago. I'm back. We're still alive. I've marked this as final since it's unlikely you'll hear from us after this. It's been over 29 hours and the wipe still hasn't come. Z and I can still remember everything. I've read over my previous posts over and over, showed them to him in hopes that he'd find something in there that we'd missed. But neither of us can. For some reason, the wipes have stopped, at least for now. I think whatever's causing all of this knows we're coming. All of this is deliberate. It's setting up for something big. I'm typing to you from the camp we set up outside the plant. It took us about 4 hours to hike here in the snow. We haven't decided whether we should go inside yet. I'm finally seeing it up close after hearing about it for so long. It's massive. Fenced areas filled with power cells and overload buffers surround the entire place, taking up the entire corner of red pier. The walls must be at least 40 feet high, covered in pipes and corrugated metal. The hum of the rotors is deafening from this location. It's like the water is rising up out of the ocean and dragging the land into its domain. It's terrifying. And the light, that light coming from inside. This is the first time I've seen incandescent light since the first wipe. I've only been able to see by a fire for, God, I don't even know how long it's been. Our sense of time passing is probably warped beyond comprehension. I can't describe how strange this artificial illumination looks now. I remember feeling this way by the fire in the tourist center, albeit vaguely. I would always crawl up close so I can feel the warmth of the flames steadily licking my face, thawing away the cold. And when I was at that perfect euphoria, that state where I was neither hot nor cold, I'd close my eyes. The way the light danced across my eyelids was the only thing that let me rest. Now, seeing the powerful radiance coming from inside this huge structure, it's almost as if I'm able to ignore the conditions out here and bathe in this sweeping, shimmering glow. I feel warm and cozy inside, almost as if I'm still at home. Home. Why am I remembering this now? Why all of a sudden do I have a perfect image of what home is? This entire time, I don't think I've considered the concept of having a home. I never even once thought that I came here from somewhere. That warmth, that soothing glow. It feels... What is this feeling? It feels familiar. Why am I remembering now? Why am I able to recall things that occurred before the first wipe? I'm in the air. The clouds are rushing past my face. I see the beautiful blue sky wrapping across the endless plain. I'm on some sort of vehicle. A plane. This has to be a plane. I'm connecting my thoughts. There's another man sitting next to me. His legs are crossed over the bench seat, and he's looking at me and smiling. He's dressed in a coat and a woolen cap. His face it's just a blur. In fact, everything's a blur now. What's happening to me? What is this memory? C just slapped me across my face. He says I've been sitting here frozen in front of the laptop for about 2 minutes. The battery just reached 10%. My ears had just popped from the sudden rush of cold air coming from the resort town in the distance. The piercing screech of the turbines isn't helping. We're going inside. I've decided. Yes. C. We're doing it right now. Don't worry. I'll update as we move forward. I need to find out what's causing all of this. I need to remember. Update number 1. We're inside. The whole place is filled with this brilliant, pervasive light. It seems to be coming from no specific source. It's just filling up the entire place. It feels wonderful. It feels wrong. I don't know how, but I feel like I'm not supposed to be experiencing this. This light, whatever it is, wherever it's coming from, it's not human. It can't be. It's like before, with the residue on the door. The light doesn't seem to reflect off of anything. It's like a solid object. A mass. I'm seeing my memories again. The man from the previous flashback is there by the fire. The same fire that was at the tourist center. He's sitting on the hearth, laughing at some unheard joke. He's dressed in some sort of sweater vest and is sipping a mug of cocoa. I still can't see his face. It's like it's been smudged by an ethereal fingerprint. No matter how hard I try, I can't picture what its form is. Everything in the background, the noise, the color, suddenly just amalgamated into a long spout of white noise. I'm left here alone with my thoughts now. C is outside, making sure we erase all trace of our campsite, in case they don't know we're here and are tracking us. I keep looking at this alien light, and it reminds me of my home. My home, which I've forgotten a long time ago. Why is it so alluring? What does it want? C's back. Well, there's no going back from here. We're going into the turbine room. Update number 2. The room is empty. As soon as we opened the doors, it all went dark. All the lights just simultaneously shut off. It's completely black. It's a darkness I've never experienced before. Even when we had no light, our eyes were able to make out things. It's like I'm floating in space. The noise of the turbines is muffled now. It's like an oar paddling through a steady pond. What? Why do I know what an oar is? That man, he's in a rowboat with me, looking out at a series of calm waves that I can't quite focus on. His hand reaches out and takes mine. I see a small gold ring on his finger. He smiles at me. Were we in love? Why can't I see this when it's only black? No, this has to be an hallucination. They're playing tricks with my mind, making me see and feel things that aren't real. C. Where is C? I keep calling out to him, but I'm not getting any response. I'd almost forgotten about him. Did they take him too? Am I the only one left? I'm starting to panic. Not even the fading light from the laptop is enough to permeate the encroaching blackness. Everything's going dark. The laptop battery is at 1%. It's not going to make it. I'm going to be stranded here. I won't have figured out anything. No. There are too many questions. Where did the people go? What is that light? Who's that man I keep seeing? Who am I? I need answers. I need to know. Something. Anything. I need to be aware. I need to know I'm not alone. But I am alone. I'm going to vanish off the face of this earth just like the others. It's funny. Even when I'm typing this, I feel like I'm talking to a real person. But the disconnection between us, just the acknowledgement of the gap between me and every single person viewing this is enough to make me give up hope. Hello? Is anyone there? I need to know if someone hears me. Not just acknowledges me, but hears me. I need to know. Final update. It's hard to describe what just happened. I'd been in the dark for a few minutes after the battery ran out, or hours, or days. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I just remember that, the next second, I was surrounded by light. The same light I remember seeing so many times before, twisting out of the eyes and ears of those people as they screamed in unbearable pain. I remember that. I could remember everything. Then the light spoke to me. No, not spoke. Spoke isn't the right word. The combined thoughts of this being permeated my very consciousness, delivering its words into immediate comprehension. There was no delay between the transmitting and receiving. It was an instantaneous flow of information. It said that this was a test, an experiment. It started with the ones with the weakest will, the flimsiest brain capacity. They were the easiest to infiltrate, work their way through their consciousness using as little power as possible. Everyone after that needed more and more power. We never realized that each wipe meant the removal of an entire tier of intelligence. Red Pier was a giant crucible, with the power plant burning bright at its epicenter. Those too frail to fight the light were quickly erased from existence, until only one was left. It said that I was being given the opportunity to ascend. It gave me my memories back one by one, watching me sob in pain and sorrow for those I'd lost. I'd had a husband, a beautiful, beautiful man who wanted nothing more than to be with me. We'd come to Red Pier for our last date before our wedding. It showed me how I was afflicted by these emotions. The beings that make up this light are free of the bonds of consciousness and all the burden that comes with it. To them, it's a disease. It's a deep, unstoppable pain that eventually consumes us all. It worms its way through our hearts and minds until the agony is so great that we simply can't be brought to live any longer. They asked me to join them. I told them I needed some time, and now I'm here. I'm in a room not too different from the empty abandoned space in the tourist center. The laptop is in front of me, its battery infinitely being drained as time perpetuates around me, and I'm left alone with this impossible decision. If I stay here on this plane, everyone I love will be dead. I'll have to live with the thought that people died so I can have this opportunity which I passed down like an ungrateful, spoiled child. They'll all have died in vain. If I ascend, I'll lose all semblance of humanity. Everything that made me my own self, any self, will be completely wiped out. I'll spend the rest of infinity crossing the multiple planes of reality as a passenger without a vehicle, living whatever I want to live. I wouldn't be able to live with myself either way. But before you all suggest to me what I should do, I just want you all to know that I've already made my decision. In fact, the decision was already made from the start. By sending this message out, not only will I have spread the word, I'll have spread the knowledge of these beings to people across the globe. Ignorance was what kept them sedated. Keep this as a record of what happens when the light comes and takes you. When we come to your location, you'll know. In the meantime, we'll be preparing, looking for a sufficient source of power for the next test. You'll come to see the light in one way or another. The next wipe is in 5 days, 8 hours, 44 minutes, and 2 seconds. Good luck. H. What you are about to read was posted on 4chan's Paranormal Export on Halloween Day of 2013 by an unknown user by the name of Prozac101. Being a daily visitor to X, I was one of the first people to reply to the girl's post, and I think it's best that I tell you now that I was pretty creeped out by what I had read, probably the most I had been in a long time. It's kind of hard for me to explain the strange feelings I got, but there was something quite different about her story, due to the fact that I couldn't stop thinking about it for days after it had first been posted on the board. Just to make everything clear, I am not entirely the original author of this piece, just merely an anonymous editor that felt it was his duty to share Prozac 101's story even further with the world. Here goes. Hey X, just thought I'd share a couple spooky stories from my childhood, just to get everyone all hyped up for Halloween. When I was a child, it was just me and my mother. We lived in a property owned by my grandma, a 3-story old farmhouse right at the fringe of the woods. It was far off the road down a long, unlit gravel driveway. It felt very isolated at night, being so distant from any other houses set in an area that hadn't been inhabited for 30 years before we started living in it. Quite often, I was a fairly rambunctious child, so while my mom went off to work, I would occasionally skip the morning bus to school and stay home all day. The big house had a habit of feeling incredibly lonely and sparse, so I spent most of my time playing in the forest expanse outside. Some distance into the woods, far enough that I couldn't hear my mother when she called, there was a toppled pine which had crashed into another. An even larger trunk on its way down was now frozen there, forming a large arc over the forest floor. I loved to climb up this jagged stump at the base of the fallen tree, and then steady myself to a point just above the middle. I was never able to make it all the way to the top because it just got too steep for me to continue any further, and I had a bad habit of freaking out from how high up it was. One day, I was sitting in my usual spot on the fallen tree, which was a good distance from the ground, just listening to the birds singing and simultaneously feeling the warmth of the sun on my neck, when I heard something from underneath that paralyzed me in shock. "Hey kid." I was gripped by a sudden strong surge of fear for a moment. The voice had come from directly underneath me. I strained to look down but couldn't see anything over the ledge. For a long time I just sat there in absolute silence, and I was at the point where I was almost soon to convince myself that I had imagined hearing a man's voice at all. "I know you can hear me." His voice was much louder this time as I yelled something out and scrambled up the log a bit higher. Trembling nervously, I dug my fingernails into the bark and held tight for dear life. I sat there, trying to collect my nerves for God knows how long. Although I couldn't see it, the presence of the thing underneath me was still clear. The birdsong was much softer and more cautious this time, and when I listened closely, I swear I could hear the faintest echo of human breathing. Gathering all my courage, I vowed to prove to myself that it was all my imagination by leaning over the edge as far as I possibly could without slipping right off. Digging hard into the bark behind me, I stretched out along my arms and peered over, getting a full view of the empty forest floor and undergrowth when suddenly, "Come down here or I'll come up and grab you." It was so loud. It was as if it was screamed right in my face. I released my grip on the tree in fright and plunged off the platform. I was saved only by grabbing a nearby branch, and for one awful second, my bare legs dangled in the cool air. When I pulled myself up, I ran at full speed to the top of the collapsed pine, to the point where I had never reached before. I sat there, just below the rustling canopy, pissing myself and staring at the distant base where the splintered wood rose, fully expecting at any moment to see someone crawling rapidly up the pine towards me. Instead, all I heard was the wind whistling in the leaves above and below me, and occasional snippets of birdsong. It was about 2 hours before my mother got home and found me, after much worried searching, trembling, and crying at the top of the fallen tree. Although this incident spooked both me and my mother, in time, I somehow recovered, exhibiting that naive hard skin of a child. Although, I never went as far into the forest as I used to, and never again even approached that fallen tree. Once when I was 12, I had the chore of taking firewood from the shed out back, just at the edge of the woods, and to bring it back inside the house. It was a tiresome job, and I always chose to do it at dusk when the air was brimming with mosquitoes and a swamping fog that usually coated the lawn. By the time I made it to my last round, I would sprint back to the house spooked. One of my least favorite things about the job was the shed was full of barn owls. If you have ever seen a barn owl's face staring at you from a dark roof corner, then you will know how uncomfortable that shed made me. One of these nights, it got mistier than it had ever been before. A thick silver fog covered everything and limited my line of sight to a short sphere around me. Even though the shed wasn't far from my house, I found myself feeling disoriented, and more than once I walked in the wrong direction. Both times, for some reason, walking straight into those woods. By the time I had reached my last load, it was too foggy to see the streets. My eyes stung in the moisture, and it made my vision blur. Lurching forward, I managed to walk headfirst into a tree, doubling over and dropping all my wood I was bundling onto my feet with a hard crunch. As I went to pick them up, with my foot throbbing pretty hard, I realized that the ground was too misty for me to see my own knees. I decided to head to the house since we had more than enough for one night. However, it was getting to be pretty dark and I couldn't make out any signifiers of which direction I was heading in. Even though I cautiously walked for several feet in all directions, trying to figure out my positions in the mist, I still couldn't figure out any point of identification. I couldn't even locate the fence or the gate, and the more I walked, the more I seemed to stumble into trees, pine needles and muds crunching under my feet instead of a dew-covered lawn. After a while, I finally realized that I couldn't even find the shed anymore. Cursing myself for being so dumb, while trying to ignore my thumping heart and sense that something else was at play, I became aware that I was lost somewhere in the fringe of the forest. Screaming out for my mother at the loudest possible volume was only met with a resounding silence in the depths of the mist all around where I stood, affirming that I'd wandered too far from the house to be heard. As a deep panic started to settle on me, I noticed a glimpse of something pink moving against the nearby pine trunk. Coming closer, I saw that it was a ripped-out square of pink paper. On it, there was an arrow pointing left. Looks vaguely like something my mom might make, I rationalized, to keep me from getting lost. So foolishly, I followed the directions set by the green arrow, shivering in the increasing cold. I kept walking for about 5 to 10 minutes before needing to stop to take a breath. My heart was pounding so fast and it was beginning to hurt. As I was sitting down, however, I spied what appeared to be another note fluttering on a nearby trunk. I noticed that this one was embedded with a long nail. It bore another arrow, this one pointing up, and a small, sloppily written note that said "this way." Despite my increasing panic, I convinced myself that these notes were my only shot at getting back before nightfall. I was desperate to get the hell out, and my brow was cold with sweat, so I followed the green arrow to a point where I could just dimly make out another spot of pink up an incline of collapsed stumps and leaf litter. At this point, it was getting pretty dark, and I had to strain both my eyes just to see a few meters ahead of me. Following the green arrows, feeling less and less sure of where I was, I stumbled through the woods, groping out in the mist to feel for trees, although I was terrified of something unseen grabbing my arm. I came across the third green note, which had another arrow pointing up again. This one led to an increasingly steep slope that I didn't recognize being anywhere near my house, and with a poorly drawn smiley face right above it. At this stage, I became too freaked to cope and started to cry there a little. As I slumped against the pine stump, the possibility that I would be out in these woods all night was beginning to sink in, like a syringe being driven into the veins within my arm. I caught a glimpse of another pink square in the near distance. Squinting hard, unnerved by these notes, all of which looked fresh without a sign of decay despite the previous week's nonstop rain, I read it from afar. What I read made my blood turn cold. I stood to my knees, dead silently, wobbling on them in fear. My ears were sensitive to any tiny prickling of noise in the mist. For a long time, I stood there in the rolling fog, reading and rereading that horrible note over and over again, before a snapping stick somewhere behind me caused me to sprint blindly, twigs snagging at my ankles and cutting up my face as I ran. Written on the note, in big green letters, was my name. It felt like I was running for hours, all the while, The rain and the mist lapped at the back of my neck like the decaying breath of someone running right behind me. Somehow, I made it back to the house. All the lights were off and I struggled to find the keys for a moment. When I found them, I bolted indoors and quickly crawled into my bed where I remained, unsleeping till morning. Mom just thought I'd come inside and gone to bed and hadn't thought to leave the lights on. It was a miracle, aka some freakish coincidence that I even found my house at all. The final incident at that damn house was only witnessed by my mother. Up until then, she had never experienced any of the strange things as I had, although we mutually shared the peculiar oppressive quality that the house's interior had on us and its placement in the dreary, imposing woods. Although I was obviously never a popular kid by living way out in the country in the opposite direction from everyone else at my school, I did make some tight friends in my first year of high school. One of these friends, Amanda was her name, invited me over one night and I accepted. My mother drove me out of the place, which was about 3 miles away, then drove me back home. The night went well. We watched a horror movie suitably, devoured some pizza, and probably smoked a little pot. My mother went home alone, where she intended to get some writing done. She worked for a magazine at that point. It was about midnight when I received an off-putting text from my mom in all caps. "Is this a prank? I need to know immediately." Thinking it was some kind of joke, I texted back, "Calm yourself. Is what a prank?" Almost immediately the response, "Are you at the house?" Of course I responded no, though I was thoroughly weirded out. I didn't receive another message until around 3 a.m. when she told me to go to my grandmother's in the morning and to, not by any means, dare go home. I remember those bleak torrents of rain the day I went to my grandmother's and how terribly soaked I was when I finally got there. It was nearly 2 towns away. I had to fight the temptation to go home and drop off my bags, but Mom's disturbing messages from last night were enough of a warning not to do so. When I arrived, Mom and Grandma were having lunch. At first, my mother seemed to be in some sort of a composed state, but when I got a better look at her, I noticed that all of the color had drained from her face and she was slightly trembling. At one point, she even sent a small glass crashing to the floor after flinching at the cat brushing around her ankles. It wasn't until later that night, when my grandma was sound asleep, that she told me what happened. She went further as to forbid me from telling my old grandma, out of fear that it would horrify her superstitious soul too much. This is what happened the night when I was at Amanda's, as she described in lurid detail. My mother was sitting on the first story in the living room, where she sat on the couch by the fire, curtains open to view the sunset on the canopy, going over her latest draft. At first, it was so faint that she barely noticed it, but after a while, my mother became aware of and vaguely irritated by tiny thumping noises near her head at the window. When she went over to investigate, she saw fat brown moths of a kind we often got at that place buzzing madly into the glass. Reasoning that this was the cause of the sound, she returned to her work, however, feeling rattled in some way. It was when the noises started to get sharper and louder that she paid more attention and saw that rocks were being thrown at the window from the total blackness of the forest edge. She saw them appear from the shadows of the bush and then fall in an arc and bounce off the window. Looking carefully, she could see some small cracks where some heavy ones had hit right beside where her head had been moments before. Temporarily captivated, she tried to peer into the darkness enough to make out where the rocks were being thrown from. Then, with a startled shock, she jumped back from the window as she saw me standing half behind a tree right near the window, grinning wide and staring at her, with my one visible eye stretched wide open, showing all the white. She barely stifled a scream seeing her own daughter standing there, just staring and smiling. It was standing by one of the nearest pines, far from where the rocks were shooting up out of the bush, as they continued to do so in a loud downpour. My face unceasingly continued to press out at her, smiling. Thinking this was all some kind of sick prank, hence the later text, my mother shouted my name at the top of her lungs, frightened to the core. However, instead of responding, The mouth of the thing that looked like me behind the tree just started moving as if it were mouthing words silently, really fast, really fast. Suddenly, it turned its head to the side and seemed to be talking to someone else behind the tree, my mom said, who couldn't be seen. But she could see a formless black shape hanging against the other side of the tree. The girl that looked like me kept staring at my mother and doing the silent speed talking thing, then turning and whispering to the thing next to her. Then, she would turn back and start up again. Then, breaking the monotonous spell, she suddenly pointed straight at my mother and started laughing. My mother screamed and fled to the bedroom on the second story, the only room with a working lock, where she shut herself in and sat at the far end of the bed as the rocks began to pitter-patter against the window downstairs, dry heaving and weeping in fear. In my room, my mother said she did not feel safe. There was an awful smell and a weird humming noise in the walls, as she described. She tried to pray for a time before giving up and just listening to the rocks pelt the walls and windows. Somewhere in the kitchen, she caught the distinct, vibrant sound of a window actually smashing, and the weird, continuous humming. Listening more carefully, she could identify it as the softest hint of a mumbling voice. In absolute horror, she recognized the voice and then, virtually too afraid to look, she tilted her head up to the closet door, where an awful white face could be seen staring right at her, mouth contorting and gaping in what sounded like a highly sped-up whispering. The closet door was only a meter away from my mother. It started to open slowly. In an unimaginable explosion of terror, she immediately bolted to the door, only to fumble with the lock as bigger and bigger rocks came crashing through the window, which burst apart in a spray of glass shards, before finally getting out, running out of the house, completely keeping her eyes off the woods, getting into her car, and driving off. She said that as she glanced back, right at the end of the prolonged drive, she saw two unmistakable human forms standing at my broken bedroom window, watching as her car got further and further away from our house. This would be their final farewell, as my mother never stepped foot in that place again. As my mother told this story, she broke down into tears. I didn't doubt her, and I still don't. I honestly and fully believe that she experienced what she said she did. It was also quite clear that we were done living in that house once and for all. I only went back once with my dad, who I see very rarely now. He came from another state to help us move. Mom had already found a place in town and moved in. My dad and I just loaded up his truck with all that was left inside there. It was a silent, sunny morning when he removed all the stuff and emptied the place. I wish I could say there was some closure, some final spooking to cap it all off, but there wasn't. I was just relieved to be out of there. There are, however, only two things left worth mentioning. One, when we checked the house for any signs of intruders, we found that several windows, including one in my bedroom and kitchen, had been smashed and rocks had been lying on the floor. 2, Dad went out into the trees for a bit to take a leak. When he came back, he asked how long we'd had the swing set for. Needless to say, we'd never had a swing set, so I was fairly unsettled to discover that in the week since we had been gone, someone had assembled a rope swing set from one of the highest branches of the old pine over the ridge, against which was the fallen log I'd stopped climbing many years ago. It was obviously a new rope and a nicely polished sanded down wooden seat at the base. Dad, wanting to keep my mind from recent events, he doubted the affair and thought my mother was mentally unstable, said that a neighbor probably set it up, not realizing it was on our property. Of course, he knew as well as I did that we literally had no neighbors for at least a mile in any direction. There were no houses in all that space, and never in my time living there did I ever see any other signs of human habitation. But I let it all go, and was pleased enough to just say good riddance to that horrible place as we drove off for good. For the most part, I found it best to try and forget what happened at that place. Sometimes I just can't help but ponder it, though. It's been long enough now that I no longer feel scared talking about it, but for a long while, I couldn't. Seeing as it is Halloween, what better time to share? My grandma just recently sold the house to a new family, that being a young couple and their little son, shortly after we moved out, despite my mother's desperate insistence that it be left empty. Now, she refuses to talk about what happened altogether. I am less anxious about it, although sometimes I can't help but let my imagination get the better of me. All I can do is think of that old house, that fallen down tree, the new occupants, and the swing out back, gently spinning in the breeze as the little boy toddles obliviously towards it. When people who died and come back to life say they saw a bright light, they are full of shit. It's not necessarily their fault though. The mind has a difficult time figuring out things that it's never experienced. Therefore, the mind cannot understand. I'm one of the special, select few who have experienced death and rebirth often. Before you start banging your head against your keyboard, let me first say that I'm not some silly movie monster or a ghost riding you from beyond the grave. At least, I don't think so. I am human, just like you, and I am a God-fearer, just like many of you, and I enjoy the vices of life, just like you. The only difference, probably, is that my vice is a little unorthodox. If you look hard enough, yes, even on Reddit, though I don't recommend you go snoop, you will find that I am not alone in my indulgence. I'm actually in several clubs, support groups, message boards, whatever, as it pertains to my vice. It's always safer this way. I should probably point out that my favorite movie of all time is Flatliners. I watched this movie at a time in my life that it had a profound effect on me. I've often wondered if it would have made the same impression had I watched it a year before or after I became a slave to my addiction. Silly me even attempted to become a medical doctor because of that movie. I didn't take into account how the side effects from my addiction would literally cripple important parts of me. So much for performing surgery with one arm. Okay. Enough pussyfooting. I'm here to give a warning. So let's jump right in it then. I love being suffocated. To clear the minds of those who live in the gutter, yes, I've partook in and have enjoyed erotic asphyxiation. The orgasms can be mind-blowing, again, literally. I do not recommend it to anyone. Many of my friends are in it just for that, and I've lost several friends going solo and even partnered. It is nothing to mess around with. Just so I am crystal fucking clear, I am not advocating this shit. Besides the euphoria and the sensation and powerlessness I get from being suffocated, I have a dual purpose. I like flirting with death. There's something scientifically and spiritually satisfying, no, necessary, for me to push the envelope and see what's on the other side of that door. I've had that fascination since I was 8 years old, when I drowned in my backyard pool. Obviously, I was resuscitated, but before I had my first NDE, near-death experience. I did not see a bright light at the end of some tunnel. I didn't fly through space or to some faraway galaxy, and I did not see our creator. But one thing that I can confirm is that your life does flash before your eyes. It has every time I've reached death. I've become so familiar with it now that I use it as a marker for my research. The easiest way I can describe the flash is more like my life experiences being downloaded or even unzipped like some computer file. I am conscious of it, even aware of what is flashing in my mind, but it all happens at a different speed than that of the conscious world. Then it all goes black. And yet you are still there, aware, conscious, but without your bodily senses. You cannot see, you cannot hear, smell, taste, or feel, but you can sense. It's so hard to describe, but the best I can do is that, depending on what experiences are flashed in your mind, you will sense the variations of great heaviness or great weightlessness when you are in the dark. There is always a presence. I didn't quite understand it until after my 8th time I went under. The first 7 times I always sensed the great heaviness, like what you would imagine deep sea diving would feel like but without the suit. It was never pleasant, but on my 8th time, I happened to have an incredibly wonderful day. My brother returned from the first Iraqi war. I made out with my lifetime school crush, and I happened to be rolling when I decided to go under, this time for the pleasure. That's when the happiest moments of my life flashed in my mind before entering the darkness and into the great weightlessness. And it was at this moment I first sensed something I did during my other sessions. I realized I was sensing it. I've gone under over 30 times, and during my research/euphoria, I've had lost function in one of my arms, partial function in my legs, much of my sight, and now some of my speech. I can think and type normally, but my motor skills are decaying. I knew that my flirtation with death will soon be up, since my body is not built to tinker with the other side the way I do. And so now, I found it necessary to share my research with you all. I think it is a psychopomp. For those who don't know, a psychopomp is a guide of souls, whose responsibility is to escort newly deceased souls to the afterlife. I do not think their role is to judge the deceased, but simply provide safe passage for the departed. I have sensed its presence every time I've gone under, and now I believe that there are many more than one. My warning to everyone is this: if you are capable, make sure when you are ready to die that you find yourself in a good place emotionally. When death comes and you are angry, sad, or even surprised, the great heaviness does not feel like something you want to carry on, wherever on leads. I'm not saying there's a heaven or hell, or any other religious theme to my warning. I'm simply warning that, from what I have sensed, you better be living the good life when it's your time to die. As for me, I no longer have the chance to die a happy man. I have been living in perpetual fear for the last month. A month ago to the day, I sensed numerous psychopomps at once for the first time. This isn't abnormal when I'm under and after my NDE, but it is abnormal when I am conscious and alone, like I was a month ago, and every day since, when I was sitting at my computer browsing the internet. I don't know if I sense them because my normal physical senses are lessened, but I do know I sense them. It is as if they were floating around the room, pacing like a hungry pack of wolves behind their fenced cage. And each day I choose not to go under, more and more of them arrive. All of them pacing and waiting, pacing and waiting, pacing and waiting. I know the next time I go under will be my last. It has become strikingly apparent that the psychopomps are rapidly feeding for my soul. I do not know if it's because I've been pissing them off or teasing them all these years, or because I have a soul that they all want to collect. What I do know is that, when they do finally claim their prize, I will be in the throes of true primal fear, like the stranded calf at the center of the wolf pack. In 2009, an amateur video artist studying in the UK uploaded a video onto YouTube of a recent piece he had completed. After many reports and complaints, the video was taken down. The piece allegedly begins with a lingering shot of a foggy meadow that some believe to be located in Ireland. The only sound throughout the shot is a light hissing and what sounds like muffled, unintelligible speech. The camera starts zooming in on a white shape in the field. After several tedious minutes, the shape reveals itself to be an albino deer. A close-up shot of its eyes suddenly appears, showing signs of infection and possibly the beginning stages of blindness with them. The following shot is a scene of the deer staring at a vanity mirror for about a minute. After this, the piece takes a turn for the bizarre, with the deer in the reflection moving in dissonance with the real one. Zooming in, the camera focuses on the deer in the reflection, which has begun to move about in an unnatural and grotesque fashion, as if something was molding it like a piece of clay. As these unnerving contortions continue, the camera zooms out, showing a shot of the real deer lying on the ground. People have described the deer as looking strangely at peace. The shot goes on for roughly 2 minutes. The reflection is still twisting and gesticulating, but the mirror itself seems to be growing darker. The deer lying on the ground then starts to excrete a dark fluid from under its tail, suggesting that a birth is about to occur. The tar-like substance continues to bubble and seep out of the deer. This is the point where many people claim to have stopped watching it. Some accounts vary on what happens next, but many describe a scene where a stillborn humanoid infant is birthed from the deer, covered in a dark tar-like sludge that makes it hard to describe exactly what it looks like. Some have claimed it was a model of a human-animal hybrid, put together by the artist for the sake of the film. A blurry close-up shot of the hybrid's face is seen for a few seconds before it cuts back to the mirror, now broken, within the same field from the beginning. Black and white stock footage of an audience applauding is shown in slow motion. And then the film ends with a 5-minute shot of a black screen, accompanied by unintelligible murmuring, slowly fading in volume. Many say that the film can no longer be found online, while others say that the audio track is sometimes circulated around file sharing programs like BitTorrent. There are even some who claim to have obtained the film itself through these means. Occasionally, screenshots surface on image boards and other such sites, but the film itself has hardly been seen since its initial debut. A year later, the artist posted another video on YouTube. This time, it was just 5 minutes of a black screen in silence, with just a link to a webcam site in the description to serve as evidence. Viewers describe seeing a pair of dangling pale white feet slightly rotating above a knocked-over chair. The creator of the video, Cervine Birth, is best known for this shocking final piece, but many are not aware of his earlier works, which are similar in terms of content and style. Shot in black and white, the piece often referred to as Foxtrot was created in early 2005. The film begins with a shot of a moonlit forest, with a slow fade to the beginning of the first scene. A gaunt, malnourished-looking fox is seen staggering through the forest, wailing and crying out in a haunting voice, with what appears to be a noose tied around its neck. The camera follows the rope to the end, where the fox's cubs can be seen dragging behind. It isn't certain whether the cubs are dead or not. The film cuts to a brief shot of the crescent moon as it slowly devolves into a shapeless blur. The soundtrack for the film so far has consisted mostly of the fox's wailing, and a wailing musical track many describe as unnatural and unnerving. It cuts to a clearing in the forest. The fox is seen ambling towards the center, still dragging her young behind her. The music gradually fades into silence as the fox is curling up on the ground, getting ready to die. After a few moments, with nothing but her final breath breaking up the silence, a close-up of her face is shown. Her eyes are still glimmering under the moonlight. A pair of small, pale, childlike hands start to caress her face. More small hands start showing up in the shot, before the camera slowly zooms out to show much of the fox's body being covered in caressing hands and arms. The shot flickers out a few times, before cutting to the interior of a darkened household. The camera slowly makes its way into a dining room, where a family of corpses is seen decaying in their seats. On the table is the same fox, but this time it is alive and healthy, tending to her cubs. Close-up shots of the bodies follow, revealing them to possess wounds indicating a possible mass suicide. In the closing shot, a moth is seen fluttering about a dangling light bulb in a dark room when a hand that can only be described as animal-like reaches up and shuts it off.